organizing that work. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, House lawmakers passed legislation Friday to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. The pipeline would bring carbon-intensive tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada, to the Texas Gulf Coast. It has been in the works for more than 6 years amidst mass protests over its potential to accelerate climate change. The Senate is expected to vote this week on a similar pro-Keystone bill backed by Louisiana Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu. Landrieu is facing a tough battle to keep her seat in a runoff next month against Republican Congressman Bill Cassidy, who also happens to be the sponsor of the pro-Keystone bill in the House. Landrieu spoke last week about her support for Keystone. This is a part of what she said.
It needs to get done on its own because it's standing alone. It will go to the president's desk standalone. And then I believe that the president will have to make an important decision. I'm hoping that he will sign it. But if he doesn't, that's the process. I hope that he will, and I will be urging him to do so because his administration, his State Department, his EPA, and his Transportation Department has urged him to support this piece of legislation for the strength of our economy, a signal to our allies to strengthen America here and abroad.
Louisiana Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu speaking last week. Meanwhile, during a visit to Burma, President Obama was asked about the Keystone XL. He refuted claims it would create jobs or reduce the price of gas in the U.S.
My government believes that we should judge this pipeline based on whether or not it accelerates climate change or whether it helps the American people with their energy costs and their gas prices. And I have to constantly push back against this idea that somehow the Keystone Pipeline is either this massive jobs bill for the United States or is somehow lowering gas prices. Understand what this project is. It is providing the ability of Canada to pump their oil, send it through our land down to the Gulf where it will be sold everywhere else. And it doesn't have an impact on U.S. gas prices.
That's President Obama. He's speaking to reporters last week in Burma, standing next to the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi. To find out more about the Keystone XL, we are joined by Democracy Now! Video stream by Naomi Klein, journalist, best-selling author. Her latest book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. Her previous books, No Logo and The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. She's speaking to us from her home in Toronto. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Naomi. Can you respond to what President Obama just said?
Well, I think he said some important things. The idea that it's still up for some kind of debate whether or not building Keystone XL has a climate impact is, it's absurd. Keystone is a pipeline that is intimately linked to plans by the oil and gas industry to dramatically expand production in the Alberta tar sands. They have pipeline capacity, more or less, to get the oil out that they're producing right now, but they have active plans to double and triple production in the Alberta tar sands, digging up one of the highest carbon fuels on the planet with tremendous local impacts to health impacts to First Nations people, to Indigenous people living in that region, violating their treaty rights. And of course, when that oil is burned, it has tremendous climate impacts. It also has climate impacts in the fact that it's really, really difficult to get that tarry oil into a product that can be burned because it isn't liquid, because it is semi-solid. So it takes a huge amount of energy. This is why it is so carbon intensive to extract it and to refine it. It also takes a huge amount of water. So it obviously has a climate impact because it is linked to the expansion of the tar sands. Now, when this debate really started heating up 3 years ago, the tar sands were booming. And the message was, and when we first saw the first environmental assessments out of the State Department, basically what they were saying is Keystone doesn't matter to climate because they'll be able to get that expanded oil production. They'll be able to get it out another way, whether through trains, whether through other pipelines built through British Columbia, for instance, or built eastward through eastern Canada. And what's really shifted in 3 years is that that claim cannot be made now because the tar sands are really surrounded by opposition. Everywhere they try to build a new pipeline or expand an existing pipeline, they're facing fierce direct action as well as legal challenges by Indigenous people and by other interests. So, the idea that if you don't build Keystone, they'll get it out anyway is absurd. Keystone it's not a drop in the bucket when it comes to tar sands. If Obama said no to Keystone now, it could really be the nail in the coffin for an industry that is in crisis on multiple fronts because they have this huge problem of having a landlocked pool of carbon and no viable way to get that oil to the sea if they increase production at the levels they'd like to.
And Naomi, correct me if I'm wrong, but this statement by President Obama seemed to be the most clear statement on his part that he wasn't buying the general line that the Republican Party and that the energy industry has been putting out about Keystone for quite a while.
Look, it's an encouraging line in that he's challenging the claim that this is a big job creator. It's an encouraging line in that he's clearly stating that this is about exports. It's not about supplying oil to the U.S. domestic market because, of course, that pipeline is being built to export terminals. And there's, frankly, a glut of oil in the U.S. since because of Bakken oil, because of shale oil. And this is also something that has shifted since this debate really kicked off more than 3 years ago. At that time, it was sort of pre-domestic oil boom in the U.S. So the idea that oil was needed, that argument could be made more credibly, much more credibly than it can today, because there's actually an oversupply. So he's saying some important things. My worry is that he's still it's still a technicality. He's waiting for yet another environmental assessment, and based on the environmental assessments we've seen so far, I'm not holding my breath for an environmental assessment that is genuinely science-based, that takes into account all of these other challenges faced by the tar sands because of all of the resistance to the other pipelines, because of the fact that communities don't want more oil trains coming through their towns and facing potential disasters like the one in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, or even the fact that the price of oil is now much lower. And eventually that's going to have a real impact on the Alberta tar sands, because this is, in addition to being an extremely high carbon extractive process, it's an extraordinarily high cost extractive project that really only became viable on a mass scale when oil hit $100 a barrel. It costs so much to get it out that the price of oil has to stay high in order for investors to keep putting money into expanding their mines and so on. And another point that is important to mention is that investors are already getting cold feet. There are 3 major tar sands expansion projects. These are mines that were supposed to be built to dig up that tarry bitumen. And 3 of these big projects have already been canceled in the past year. Shell canceled a project, Total, the French oil company, canceled a project, and most recently Statoil, their Norwegian oil company, canceled a massive expansion project worth more than $1 billion. And when they made that decision to cancel, one of the reasons they cited was limited pipeline capacity. In other words, they're afraid that if they dig up that tar sands oil, they won't be able to get it out. So this is why I'm saying that if Obama said no to Keystone, it would have tremendous impacts in terms of sending a message to the market that this whole idea of digging up bitumen, digging up this pool of carbon that didn't used to be counted, a little bit more than a decade ago. All of this oil in the tar sands wasn't even counted as part of the world's global carbon reserves because the global oil industry did not believe they could get it out. And now we're starting to get a few messages that investors are starting to reassess the viability of digging up this carbon. And that's really important because the whole idea from a climate perspective of drawing the line and saying no more tar sands pipelines is about saying, look, we can't, when you're in a hole, you can't keep digging. We need to move away from extreme energy. We can't keep doing the very thing that is at the heart of this crisis. We need to move towards renewable energy, yes, but we also simultaneously need to stop digging up high carbon reserves of high carbon